In the late 1950s, America was in love with soda. Bottles clinked on factory lines all day and all night. Trucks rolled out before sunrise, packed with cold, sweet drinks headed to stores, diners, and gas stations across the country. And rising fast in this bubbly world was a name not many people expected: Royal Crown Cola. What started as a small regional soda had grown into a big national brand. Millions of bottles were being made and shipped every single day. RC wasn't just another cola on the shelf anymore. It was becoming a real rival. Then in 1958, RC did something no one else had done in a big way. It made a cola with no sugar. They called it Diet Right. At that time, most people thought diet drinks would taste bad. They thought no one would want them. But RC believed people wanted to enjoy soda without all the sugar. And they were right. Soon a whole new group of people started buying soda. People watching their weight. People with health problems. People who still wanted the fun of a fizzy drink. RC didn't just sell a new soda. It created a whole new kind of soda. And for a while, the biggest companies in the world, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, didn't see it coming. RC's sales grew fast. More factories worked harder. More trucks drove farther. More stores made room on their shelves. The small company that once stood in the shadows was now standing in the bright lights. Inside the company, people started to believe something bold. They weren't just keeping up with the giants. They were getting ahead of them. RC had new ideas. It had speed. It had a drink that felt like the future. The Royal in its name didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt real. From the outside, it looked like nothing could stop them. And then something changed. The sparkle faded. The noise got quieter. The giant that looked so strong began to stumble. What went wrong? Who didn't see the danger? And how does a company that touches the future lose its grip on it? So how did something this powerful collapse?
Its premium, timeless taste stands out and
Chapter 1. Long before it was a brand, before trucks and factories and millions of bottles, it was just a man with a stubborn idea. Claude A. Hatcher wasn't a big city businessman. He didn't wear fancy suits or sit in tall glass buildings. He was a pharmacist's son from the American South, raised around syrup bottles, medicine scales, and the sharp smell of soda fountains. Back then, drugstores weren't just for medicine. They were where people met, talked, and treated themselves to sweet, fizzy drinks mixed right in front of them. Claude watched closely. He saw how people smiled after the first sip, how they came back for the same flavors, how a simple drink could turn into a habit and a business. But he also saw something else. The big syrup companies that supplied those drinks acted like kings. They set the prices. They made the rules. Store owners didn't have much choice. Claude didn't like that. He believed he could make something just as good, maybe even better, and give small businesses another option. It was a risky thought. He didn't have a giant factory. He didn't have a famous name. All he had was belief and a formula he kept adjusting, one batch at a time. In a small space with basic tools, Claude began mixing his own syrup. He tested flavors again and again, chasing a smoother, richer cola taste. Friends tried it. Store owners tried it. Some shook their heads. Others asked for more. That was enough. He didn't launch with a bang. There were no national ads, no big investors, just crates of syrup, loaded by hand, delivered to local stores that were willing to take a chance on the new guy. Every yes mattered. Every reorder felt like proof he wasn't crazy. The company that would one day become Royal Crown Cola didn't begin with power. It began with rejection, long days, and a quiet promise Claude made to himself. If they won't give us a seat at the table, we'll build our own. He traveled town to town, meeting shop owners face to face. He listened more than he talked. He learned what customers liked, what they complained about, what made them come back for another glass. This wasn't a man chasing fame. He was chasing better taste, better deals, better chances for the little guys like him. Slowly, the orders grew. One town became 2. 2 became 10. The syrup business turned into a real company, with workers, schedules, and delivery routes that stretched farther each year. But success didn't make Claude comfortable. It made him bolder. Where others saw limits, he saw open space. If a flavor didn't work, he changed it. If a deal fell through, he knocked on another door. He believed problems weren't stop signs. They were puzzles. That mindset, restless, stubborn, always looking for a smarter move, became part of the company's DNA. From the very start, this wasn't a business built on size. It was built on nerve. On the belief that a small outsider could stand up in a world ruled by giants and not blink. No one back then would have called it an empire. It was just a growing soda company. fighting for shelf space and respect, one store at a time. But inside those small rooms, over sticky counters and handwritten orders, something bigger was quietly forming. Not just a drink, and like many great challengers, its greatest strength, the hunger to prove itself, would one day become the very thing that pushed it too far. Chapter 2. For years, Royal Crown Cola was the little guy. It had loyal customers, a growing map of delivery routes, a cola people genuinely liked. But in a world ruled by giants with deep pockets and louder voices, RC was still fighting for attention, one store at a time. Then came a question that sounded almost foolish. What if soda didn't need sugar? At the time, sugar wasn't the enemy. It was the point. Sweetness was comfort, celebration, energy. The idea of removing it felt like taking the fun out of the drink. But inside RC, someone was paying attention to quiet signals others ignored. Doctors were starting to warn about weight gain. Some people with diabetes had to skip soda entirely. A small but growing group of Americans wanted to enjoy treats without the guilt. Big soda companies saw this as a niche, too small to matter. RC saw an opening. Instead of asking, "Will everyone want this?" they asked, "Who desperately needs this?" The answer changed everything. In 1958, RC introduced Diet Right, the first diet cola that actually tasted close enough to the real thing to win repeat buyers. It wasn't perfect. Early artificial sweeteners had quirks. Some batches needed tweaking. But for the first time, people who had been left out of the soda world had a seat at the table. And they showed up. At first, the orders were cautious. A few extra cases. A test run on a shelf next to regular cola. Then something surprising happened. Bottlers started asking for more. Store owners noticed certain customers reaching straight for the new cans. Word spread through neighborhoods and doctors' offices. There's a soda you can drink without sugar. RC hadn't just launched a new flavor. It had created a new category. While competitors were busy fighting over who had the boldest taste or the flashiest ads, RC quietly owned the space no one else had taken seriously. Diet Right wasn't competing head-to-head with the giants yet. It was building its own lane. Sales began to climb faster than anyone inside the company expected. Production lines had to adjust. Distribution routes stretched farther. Bottlers who once treated RC as a side brand now saw it as a growth engine. For the first time, RC wasn't just surviving because of hustle. It was growing because of vision. And the difference showed. Buyers from larger chains started taking meetings. Industry magazines began to mention the diet soda trend. A trend that at that moment was basically one product from one company, RC. Inside headquarters, the mood shifted. Conversations changed from how do we keep up to how big can this get? They had spotted the future early. A future where people would think more about calories, health, and lifestyle. A future where indulgence and control would live side by side. Years before the word wellness became a billion-dollar idea, RC had bottled the first taste of it. And that breakthrough did something even bigger than drive sales. It changed how the company saw itself. No longer just the underdog cola trying to copy the leaders. Now it was an innovator, a risk-taker. A company willing to bet on an idea others thought was too small, too strange, or too soon. That confidence became fuel. More risks felt possible. Bigger moves felt justified. Growth no longer seemed like a distant dream, it felt inevitable. But hidden inside that success was a quiet danger, because the same boldness that helped RC see the future would later push it into battles far bigger than it was built to fight. Still, in this moment, none of that was visible. All anyone could see was a small company that had changed the rules of the soda world, and for the first time was being taken seriously by the giants themselves. Chapter 3. Success didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It came like a rising tide. After the surprise win of Diet Right, Royal Crown Cola stood at a crossroads. They could stay small, protect what they had, and hope the giants didn't notice. Or they could run toward the noise. They chose to run. Factories that once worked steady now worked fast. New equipment was installed. Production lines were reorganized to handle larger orders, tighter schedules, and a growing list of retailers who suddenly wanted in. RC didn't have the endless money of Coca-Cola or PepsiCo. So they did something smarter. They built partnerships. Independent bottlers, the same kind of small, scrappy operators RC had always understood, became the backbone of expansion. Instead of trying to control everything from one central tower, RC empowered local bottlers who knew their towns, their stores, and their customers. It was faster, cheaper, more personal. While bigger companies pushed from the top down, RC grew from the ground up. Trucks with the RC logo began appearing in places they had never reached before. Small towns turned into cities. Southern routes stretched north and west. What had once been a regional name was now quietly becoming national. And they didn't just ship more soda, they told a story. Marketing leaned into the underdog spirit. RC wasn't the old established power. It was the smart choice, the modern choice, the brand willing to try what others wouldn't. Diet Right ads spoke directly to people who felt ignored by traditional soda marketing. Adults watching their weight, people managing health issues, consumers who wanted control without giving up enjoyment. For many of them, this wasn't just a drink. It was permission. Permission to join the soda moment without guilt. Stores noticed. Shelf space grew. Repeat customers came back not just for taste, but for what the product meant. RC wasn't only selling cola anymore. It was selling inclusion. Behind the scenes, logistics got sharper. Routes were mapped more carefully. Warehouses were placed closer to growing demand. Timing mattered now. A missed delivery could mean losing space to a competitor waiting right behind them. RC learned to move like a bigger company, without losing the hunger of a small one. And it worked. Market share climbed. Not enough to knock the giants off their thrones, but enough to make them turn their heads. RC was no longer invisible. It was a real player in the game, with a product category it had helped create and a network that was spreading wider every year. Inside the industry, something shifted. Diet soda was no longer a strange side idea. It was a real segment. Other companies began working on their own versions, not because they believed first, but because RC had proved there was money on the table. The challenger had become a trendsetter. For employees, bottlers, and partners, the growth felt earned. Every new territory had a story behind it. A deal won, a risk taken, a long drive to convince one more distributor to give them a chance. This wasn't luck. It was momentum built step by step. And with every success, belief grew stronger. Maybe the giants weren't untouchable. Maybe speed could beat size. Maybe being first to the future mattered more than being biggest in the present. RC stood taller now, louder, more confident. But growth has a strange effect on underdogs. The bigger you get, the harder it is to stay nimble. The more you win, the easier it is to believe you can't lose. And as RC expanded its reach, strengthened its systems, and earned its place in the national conversation, it was also moving closer to a battle where smart moves alone would not be enough. Chapter 4. There was a time when the rise was no longer a question, it was a fact. By the height of its power, Royal Crown Cola was no longer the scrappy outsider knocking on doors with sample cases. It was a national force with momentum, confidence, and a product line that had reshaped the future of soda. Factories roared day and night. Metal lines clattered. Bottles flashed past in silver blurs. Pallets stacked higher. Trucks rolled out in steady waves, each one carrying thousands of drinks to cities, suburbs, and small towns across America. This was no longer a hopeful experiment. This was an empire in motion. At the center of that power stood two names on millions of labels, RC Cola and Diet Right. One satisfied tradition, bold, sweet, familiar. The other spoke to a new kind of future, lighter, controlled, modern. Together they made RC something rare in business, a company with one foot in the present and one foot already planted in tomorrow. Inside the industry, executives began saying it quietly at first, then out loud. RC had changed the game. Diet soda was no longer a side idea. It was a fast-growing category, and RC owned its origin story. While Coca-Cola and PepsiCo still towered in overall size, RC held something just as powerful in that moment. Momentum. Sales charts tilted upward. New bottling partners joined the network. Territories that once felt distant became routine stops on delivery routes. RC logos appeared on storefront coolers, roadside signs, and grocery end caps in places where, just years before, the brand had been unknown. And the numbers told the story. More production, more distribution, more shelf space, more demand. RC was no longer fighting just to be noticed. It was shaping what the soda aisle looked like. Culturally, the brand found its voice. RC wasn't polished like the old giants. It didn't pretend to be timeless. It felt current, approachable, a little rebellious. It spoke to people who didn't automatically choose the biggest name on the shelf. Choosing RC felt like making a smart choice, not just a default one. Diet Right especially became more than a drink. It became a signal, a quiet badge for people trying to balance pleasure and control. Long before fitness trends flooded television and magazines, Diet Right had already found its place in lunchboxes, office fridges, and kitchen tables. For many, it wasn't about dieting, it was about options. RC had given people an option no one else had taken seriously. That kind of innovation earns respect. Inside company offices, the mood had changed from survival to strategy. Leaders talked about long-term positioning, national influence, and future categories. Investments went into better equipment, tighter logistics, smarter forecasting. This wasn't guesswork anymore. This was a company learning how to think big. Physical signs of success rose with the numbers. Larger facilities replaced cramped early plants. Warehouses stood like quiet fortresses along highways. Office buildings filled with planners, marketers, and executives who believed they were building something that could last generations. Visitors walking through those halls could feel it, the hum of confidence, the pride of people who had outworked the odds. They had not inherited power, they had earned it. Even competitors felt the shift. RC was no longer a regional irritant. It was a national brand with a defining innovation and a loyal consumer base. Ignoring it was no longer an option. The company that once fought for scraps of attention now commanded industry focus, and that attention fed the belief inside RC that its rise was not temporary, it was destiny. The company's identity evolved with its success. It still valued its independent bottlers, still respected its roots, but now it also carried the posture of a leader. Decisions felt bolder, risks felt justified. After all, the formula had worked so far. See a gap, move fast, win early. That mindset had built the golden age. In boardrooms, expansion plans stretched further. New markets, new flavors, new variations. If the future of soda was changing, RC believed it would be the one to change it first. Employees felt it too. They weren't just working for a soda company, they were part of a success story. Every truck that left a loading dock, every new store that signed on, every ad placed in a newspaper or on television felt like proof that they belonged among the biggest names in the business. And for a while they did. From the outside, RC looked balanced and strong, rooted in a classic cola, leading in diet innovation, powered by a flexible bottler network, and driven by a culture that rewarded bold ideas. It looked unstoppable. But golden ages are tricky things, because when a company is rising, it watches the road ahead. When it believes it has arrived, it starts admiring the view. Success can change how leaders listen. It can soften the urgency that once made them sharp. It can make yesterday's winning strategy feel permanent, even as the world quietly shifts again. In factories, the machines still roared. In stores, the bottles still moved. In offices, the charts still pointed upward. Everything visible said the same thing. RC had made it. But beneath the surface, pressure was building. Competitors were studying. Consumer tastes were evolving. The very category RC had helped create was about to become a battlefield crowded with giants who had finally decided to take it seriously. The crown still sat firmly on RC's head, yet the weight of that crown was growing heavier with every passing year, because the higher a company climbs, the more it has to lose. And at the very height of its confidence, when the factories were loudest, the reach was widest, and the belief in their own momentum felt unshakable. But beneath the success, something was changing. Chapter 5. Great empires rarely fall because of one loud mistake. They fall because of a quiet one. At the height of its confidence, Royal Crown Cola believed it had finally cracked the code. Innovation had carried it forward. Speed had given it an edge. Its network of independent bottlers had helped it grow town by town, state by state. But now RC wasn't just growing. It was competing, directly, visibly, dangerously, with giants. And competing at that level came with pressure. Pressure to be faster, pressure to be bigger, pressure to look more like the companies it once proudly differed from. Inside meeting rooms, the conversation began to change. In the early days, decisions sounded like this. What do our bottlers need? What do customers like? How do we stay flexible? Now the questions were different. How do we cut costs? How do we standardize? How do we scale faster than we ever have before? None of these were bad questions. In fact, they sounded smart, responsible, necessary. RC was no longer a small challenger. It was a national brand with complex logistics and rising expenses. Growth demanded structure. Structure demanded control, so the company began to tighten its grip. More decisions moved to central offices. Processes that had once been flexible became standardized. Independent bottlers, once trusted partners with local instincts, were asked to follow stricter rules, tighter margins, and more uniform systems. On paper, it made perfect sense. Central control meant efficiency. Efficiency meant savings. Savings meant more resources to fight bigger competitors. It looked like modernization. It felt like maturity. But something subtle was being traded away. In the past, RC's strength had come from being close to the ground. Bottlers knew their communities. They adjusted promotions, deliveries, and relationships based on local reality. That flexibility had helped RC slip into markets the giants overlooked. Now decisions were made farther away. Spreadsheets replaced conversations. National strategy replaced local intuition. The system became cleaner, but also colder. At first, no one noticed a problem. Sales were still strong. Distribution still worked. Factories still ran at full speed. From the outside, RC looked sharper and more professional than ever. Inside, leaders felt proud. They believed they were preparing the company for the next level, building the kind of structure needed to survive long-term battles. And in a way, they were right, but they were also changing the company's personality. The hunger that once drove creative risks started to soften under layers of process. The scrappy mindset that once said, "Let's try it and see," slowly shifted toward, "Let's make sure it fits the system." It wasn't a dramatic shift, no big announcement, no single turning point. Just a series of small, reasonable decisions. Standardize this, trim that budget, delay that experiment, focus on what's already working. Each choice protected the present. Together, they quietly weakened the future. The change showed up in small ways first. A local bottler who once ran a clever regional promotion was told it didn't match national branding. A new flavor idea was postponed because production lines were too optimized to experiment. Marketing grew more cautious, less playful, more concerned with not making mistakes than with making impact. None of these decisions were reckless. They were careful. That was the problem. RC had once grown by seeing opportunities others missed. Now it was busy protecting what it had already built. The company that once moved like a startup was starting to move like a corporation trying not to stumble. And while RC focused on efficiency, the giants were doing something else. They were learning. They studied the diet soda category RC had pioneered. They poured money into research, advertising, and distribution muscle. They didn't need to be first anymore. They just needed to be bigger. RC's new systems made it more stable, but also less agile, less able to pivot, less willing to take uncomfortable risks. The very structure designed to help it compete at scale slowly made it harder to outmaneuver anyone. Still, the warning signs were easy to ignore. Profits looked fine, market presence was solid, brand recognition remained strong. From the inside, the shift felt like evolution. From the outside, it was almost invisible. But deep in the company's DNA, something fundamental had changed. RC had once been defined by boldness, speed, and closeness to its partners and customers. Now it was defined by process, efficiency, and caution. It had traded a little bit of its soul for a little more control. And that trade would only reveal its cost later. Because when the real storm arrived, when competition intensified, taste shifted, and pressure mounted, RC would need the very qualities it had slowly trimmed away. Flexibility, risk tolerance, that restless instinct to move first. But by then, those muscles would be weaker than anyone realized. At the time though, it all felt like progress. Responsible growth, smart management, a company growing up. No alarms rang. No headlines warned of danger, just a quiet, steady drift away from the mindset that had built the golden age in the first place. A small shift, so small almost no one could see it, until it was far too late. Chapter 6. Trouble rarely arrives with sirens. It whispers. During the years when Royal Crown Cola still looked strong from the outside, small signals began flickering at the edges of the map. Nothing dramatic, nothing headline-worthy, just friction. In a few regions, orders slowed. Not everywhere, not enough to scare anyone. But certain distributors noticed cases sitting a little longer in storage. Store managers quietly shifted shelf space, giving more room to newer competitors who came in with flashy promotions and heavy advertising support. It didn't look like decline, it looked like normal fluctuation. Inside RC, reports mentioned temporary softness in select territories. Weather, local competition, changing retail layouts, easy explanations, all reasonable, all comforting. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Customers were changing. Younger buyers, raised in a louder advertising era, were drawn to bold campaigns, celebrity endorsements, and brands that felt larger than life. RC still had loyal drinkers, but its voice wasn't carrying as far with the next generation. That shift didn't show up clearly in spreadsheets. It showed up in vibes, in conversations, in subtle preference changes that take years to become obvious. A few marketing staff noticed. They suggested bolder campaigns, riskier ideas, stronger emotional branding. But budgets were tighter now. Strategies were more cautious. Leadership preferred steady returns over creative gambles. After all, the numbers still looked healthy. Then there were the product murmurs. Nothing major, no crisis, just scattered complaints about taste differences between regions. Slight variations from bottler to bottler. Most consumers never noticed, but some did. And in a world where competitors were pouring money into consistency and quality control, Almost the same started to matter more than before. Field representatives passed along feedback. Some bottlers requested support to upgrade equipment or adjust formulas. Head office reviewed the requests carefully. Too expensive, not urgent, monitor for now. Again, reasonable decisions, individually harmless. Together they formed a pattern of delay. Inside the company, a few experienced voices felt uneasy. People who remembered the early days when RC moved quickly, fixed problems fast, and treated small signals as early warnings, sensed a change in attitude. Concerns were raised in meetings, gently at first. Are we moving fast enough? Are we listening closely enough? Are competitors catching up faster than we think? But confidence has a powerful shield. Quarterly results were still solid. Distribution remained wide. Brand recognition hadn't vanished. From the top, the view still looked stable, and stability can make caution feel unnecessary. Outside the company, the soda landscape was growing more crowded. New drinks entered the scene. Not just colas but flavored sodas, new diet options, and beverages marketed around lifestyle and image. The shelf wasn't just a battlefield anymore. It was a festival of choices. RC still had presence, but its story, once fresh and daring, was now part of the background. Being first had given it an advantage. Staying first required constant reinvention. Reinvention is uncomfortable. Maintenance is easier, so maintenance won. Even as early diet soda competitors improved their formulas and poured millions into advertising, RC leaned on its history, its existing base, and the belief that its position was secure. After all, they had built the category. How fast could others really catch up? Faster than they thought. But that realization hadn't landed yet. To leadership, the warning signs looked like noise around a strong signal. Sales overall were still respectable. Profits hadn't collapsed. The system they had built, centralized, efficient, controlled, seemed to be doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect margins and maintain order. The small cracks didn't look like structural damage. They looked like cosmetic wear. And when success has lasted long enough, it becomes easy to believe that dips are temporary, that loyalty is permanent, and that momentum can be trusted to carry itself. Meetings ended with reassurance. Reports closed with optimistic projections. The story inside headquarters remained one of steady leadership in a competitive but manageable market. Meanwhile, outside those walls, the ground was shifting inch by inch. Consumer attention was fragmenting. Brand loyalty was weakening. Marketing had become louder, faster, more emotional. The fight was no longer just about taste or calories, it was about identity. RC, once the bold innovator, now sounded careful, controlled, a little quiet in a room that was getting noisier every year. Still, nothing had broken. No disaster, no sudden drop, just a series of early tremors that, on their own, were easy to dismiss, and so they were. Because when profits remain decent and growth charts don't collapse, it's easy, almost comforting, to believe that everything important is still working. By the time the signals would be impossible to ignore, they would no longer be whispers, they would be consequences. Chapter 7. For years the warning signs stayed quiet. Then one day, they didn't. The trouble didn't begin with a dramatic explosion or a shocking headline. It started with a question. Small, technical, easy to overlook. Is this ingredient safe? By the early 1970s, the artificial sweeteners used in diet drinks, including Diet Right from Royal Crown Cola, were under growing scientific scrutiny. Researchers debated possible health risks. Regulators asked for more studies. Reporters began paying attention. At first, the discussion lived in medical journals and industry meetings. Then it moved to television. News anchors spoke carefully but seriously. Words like cancer risk and lab studies floated into living rooms across the country. Viewers didn't hear nuance, they heard danger. Diet soda, once seen as the smart, modern choice, suddenly felt uncertain. Phones rang at customer service lines. Store managers fielded nervous questions. Parents stared at cans in grocery aisles a little longer than before. RC hadn't done anything illegal, it had followed the same rules as the rest of the industry. But that didn't matter in the court of public opinion. Fear doesn't wait for final proof. Sales of diet drinks began to wobble. Not collapse overnight, but drop enough to make executives uneasy. And for RC, Diet Right wasn't just another product. It was a pillar. The company responded with statements, reassurances, and references to regulatory guidance. Scientists debated. Spokespeople emphasized safety standards. Internally, teams scrambled to assess alternatives, reformulations, contingency plans. But control was slipping, because now the story wasn't being told in boardrooms, it was being told in headlines. Competitors moved fast. Some reformulated, some leaned harder into other products. Some simply outspent everyone on advertising that shifted attention elsewhere. RC didn't have the same cushion. For a company already stretched by tighter margins and rising competition, this wasn't just a public relations problem, it was a shock to the system. Distribution partners grew cautious, retailers reduced orders, unsure how demand would hold. Bottlers felt the squeeze as cases moved more slowly. Inside factories, the rhythm changed. Not dramatically at first, but enough to be felt. Less urgency, more uncertainty. And then came the deeper blow. Diet Right had been more than a drink. It had been RC's symbol of innovation, proof that the company could see the future before others did. Now, the very product that once made RC look visionary was being talked about as a potential risk. The psychological shift was brutal. Consumers who once chose Diet Right proudly now hesitated. Some switched brands, some left diet soda altogether. Trust, once shaken, proved hard to steady. Inside RC, meetings took on a different tone. Voices were sharper, timelines shorter, decisions heavier. Leaders who once spoke about growth now spoke about damage control. The company that had learned to operate with confidence was now reacting. Fast, nervous, under pressure, and the public could feel it. News coverage didn't just question ingredients, it questioned companies. Were they transparent? Were they careful? Were they putting profits before people? Even without direct accusations, suspicion lingered in the air. For RC, a brand built on being the smart alternative, that suspicion cut deep. Sales dips became trends. Trends became forecasts. Forecasts forced difficult conversations about budgets, staffing, and long-term strategy. Every department felt the tension. What had once been a smooth machine now felt like a ship steering through a storm, adjusting course again and again just to stay upright. The crisis didn't destroy RC overnight, but it shattered the illusion of safety. The belief that steady growth and smart management could shield the company from sudden shocks was gone. In its place stood a harsher reality. Reputation could change faster than any production line could adapt. And once fear enters the story, control never fully returns. The golden age had been loud, confident, full of forward motion. This new era was cautious, reactive, uncertain. The problem was no longer internal, no longer theoretical. It was public, and everyone was watching. Chapter 8. When the storm hit, leadership at Royal Crown Cola didn't freeze. They fought. Emergency meetings filled calendars. Executives moved fast, determined to steady the ship. To them, the situation looked like a communications problem, a misunderstanding that could be corrected with the right message, the right tone, the right campaign. So they reached for what had worked before: marketing. New ads rolled out emphasizing taste, lifestyle, and normalcy. Smiling families, bright kitchens, confident slogans. The message was clear: everything is fine, nothing has changed, trust us. But the public wasn't worried about flavor, they were worried about safety. The more the ads leaned into cheerfulness, the more disconnected they felt. Instead of reassurance, viewers sensed avoidance. It was as if the company was talking around the issue, not through it. At the same time, public relations teams issued carefully worded statements. They cited regulations, scientific reviews, industry standards, technically accurate, professionally written, emotionally hollow. People didn't want policy language. They wanted empathy, clarity, and visible action. What they saw instead felt defensive, like a company trying to win an argument rather than calm a fear. Then came the legal posture. Lawyers stepped in to protect the brand from potential liability. Messaging grew tighter, more cautious. Spokespeople avoided strong commitments while investigations continued. Every sentence was reviewed, refined, stripped of anything that could be risky. In trying to say nothing wrong, the company ended up saying very little at all. Silence filled the gaps, and in those gaps doubt grew. Inside the company, pressure mounted. Falling sales triggered another kind of response: cost control. Budgets tightened. Support for bottlers grew thinner as headquarters focused on preserving margins during uncertainty. From a financial perspective, it was logical. From a human perspective, it felt like retreat. Bottlers who had once felt like partners now felt exposed. Retailers sensed hesitation. Employees felt the mood shift from confidence to containment. The organization began turning inward just when it needed to reach outward. Meanwhile, competitors moved with sharper instincts. Some reformulated quickly and made a show of it. Others leaned hard into alternative products, giving nervous consumers easy exits. Their messaging addressed fear directly, sometimes subtly framing themselves as the safer choice without naming names. RC's voice, once bold, now sounded careful and strained. The contrast was painful. What leadership saw as steady professionalism, the public interpreted as distance. What executives believed was protecting the company, many customers experienced as evasion. Trust erodes faster than it builds. Every ad that didn't answer the real question made people more skeptical. Every guarded statement made the brand seem less human. Every internal cut that reduced field support weakened the relationships that had once been RC's greatest strength. The company wasn't ignoring the crisis, it was misreading it. Leaders thought they were managing perception. In reality, they were confirming fears that the brand cared more about defending itself than understanding its customers. And once that idea takes hold, it spreads quietly but powerfully. Store by store, conversation by conversation, RC had built its rise on being different from the giants, more personal, more daring, more connected. Now, in its moment of truth, it was acting exactly like the kind of corporation people mistrusted. That shift hurt more than any headline, because it wasn't just about a product anymore, it was about identity. And with each well-intentioned but tone-deaf move, the distance between RC and the people who once believed in it grew wider. Leadership kept pushing, convinced the next campaign, the next statement, the next quarter would stabilize things. Instead, the effort only stirred the water more. The problem wasn't just the crisis, it was the response to it. For Royal Crown Cola, the shift from struggle, to slide, to spiral happened faster than anyone inside headquarters expected. What had once been small dips in certain regions turned into clear patterns. Orders didn't just soften, they shrank. Shelves that once held firm space for RC products quietly gave more room to louder, better-funded competitors. Retailers followed the numbers, and the numbers were turning. Market share slipped quarter after quarter. Not in dramatic crashes, but in steady, undeniable erosion. Each report looked survivable on its own. Together, they formed a downward slope that was hard to reverse. Meanwhile, rivals surged. Coca-Cola and PepsiCo had studied the diet category RC pioneered. Now they attacked it with scale RC could never match. Bigger advertising budgets, national promotions, stronger retailer incentives. They didn't need to be first anymore. They just needed to be everywhere. And they were. Consumers who once reached for RC out of loyalty or habit now had endless alternatives shouting for attention. New flavors, new formulas, new packaging. The soda aisle felt louder, brighter, more crowded than ever. RC, once the disruptor, now looked smaller. Inside the company, financial pressure tightened like a vice. Revenue declines forced hard conversations. Cost-cutting, once a temporary measure, became policy. Hiring froze. Projects paused. Travel budgets disappeared. Then came the deeper cuts. Layoffs. Talented employees, some who had spent decades building the brand, packed up desks and said quiet goodbyes. The mood inside offices shifted from tension to grief. Every empty chair was a reminder that the company was shrinking. Production facilities felt the strain too. Certain plants reduced output. Others faced temporary shutdowns. A few closed for good. Towns that had depended on those jobs felt the loss ripple through local economies. What had once been a growing network now looked like a map of retreat. Restructuring followed. Departments merged. Leadership roles changed. Consultants arrived with efficiency plans and survival strategies. The language of ambition was replaced by the language of stabilization. Right-sizing, streamlining, refocusing. Careful words for painful realities. Suppliers grew cautious. Bottlers already under strain questioned long-term commitments. Some shifted attention toward other brands with stronger backing and brighter futures. The partnership model that once fueled RC's rise now showed cracks under financial stress. Every part of the system felt it, and the speed of the decline shocked those who remembered the climb. It had taken decades of hustle, risk and belief to build RC into a national force. Now, in just a handful of difficult years, that presence was thinning. Influence faded. Negotiating power weakened. Confidence evaporated. The psychological change was as heavy as the financial one. Inside meeting rooms, the question was no longer, how do we grow? It was, how do we survive? And survival mode is a different kind of existence. It rewards caution, not creativity. Defense, not daring. The very instincts that had once set RC apart were buried under the urgent need to stop the bleeding. But decline has momentum too. Retailers watched the headlines and adjusted expectations. Investors saw shrinking numbers and lost patience. Talent looked elsewhere for stability. Each reaction fed the next, creating a cycle that was hard to interrupt. From the outside, it looked like a brand fading into the background. From the inside, it felt like trying to hold back a tide with bare hands. The rise had been built on bold moves and open roads. The fall felt like walls closing in from every side, faster than anyone believed possible. Chapter 10. When decline becomes undeniable, hope doesn't disappear, it sharpens. Inside Royal Crown Cola, a final wave of determination began to rise. The numbers were painful. The closures were real, the mood was heavy, but not everyone was ready to let the story end like this. Leadership changed. New faces stepped into key roles, bringing fresh energy and a different tone. Where recent years had sounded defensive and cautious, these voices spoke about renewal, about remembering who RC used to be. They talked about roots, about the early days when the company moved fast, listened closely, and dared to try what others ignored. The message inside the company was simple: we forgot what made us special. Let's find it again. Efforts began to rebuild trust. Quality checks tightened. Conversations with bottlers became more personal, less corporate. Executives traveled more, meeting partners face to face, trying to repair relationships that had thinned during the hardest years. Marketing shifted too. The bright, polished tone gave way to something warmer, more human. Campaigns acknowledged the past, celebrated loyal customers, and leaned into the brand's long history. RC wasn't trying to outshine the giants anymore, it was trying to reconnect. There were discussions about product improvements, formula refinements, and clearer communication about ingredients and standards. The company wanted to show it had listened, learned, and changed. Inside offices and plants, the renewed focus brought a flicker of belief. Employees who had stayed through the worst allowed themselves a cautious kind of optimism. Maybe the slide could be slowed. Maybe the brand still had enough goodwill left to rebuild. For a moment the energy felt familiar, like the old days, but the outside world had moved on. Retail shelves were more crowded than ever. Younger consumers had grown up with different brands as their defaults. The cultural spotlight had shifted to new trends, new drinks, new identities. RC's story, once bold and surprising, now felt like history. Reputation, once cracked, proved stubborn. Some customers appreciated the effort. A few returned. Loyal fans stayed loyal, but the broad trust that had once carried the brand through challenges didn't come rushing back. Doubt lingers longer than hope. Competitors didn't pause out of respect. They kept innovating, advertising, expanding. Their momentum, built during RC's weakest years, now formed a wall that was hard to climb. Internally, the reforms improved morale. They restored pride. They reminded people why they had believed in the company in the first place. But morale alone couldn't reverse years of market loss. Sales stabilized in places, dipped in others. Gains were small and fragile. Every step forward met strong resistance. The company was fighting not just competitors but time, and time had already reshaped the landscape. The tragedy wasn't a lack of effort, it was timing. The return to core values, the renewed focus on relationships, the honest attempt to reconnect, all of it might have changed the story years earlier. Now it served as a graceful final chapter rather than a comeback. Inside the company, people sensed it before they said it. They had rediscovered their heart, but the world had stopped listening. Chapter 11. Empires don't always end with a bang. Sometimes, they end with paperwork. For Royal Crown Cola, the final chapter didn't arrive as a dramatic collapse. There was no single day when the lights shut off and the truck stopped rolling. Instead, the end came quietly, in boardrooms and contracts, in signatures that transferred ownership piece by piece. The company that once stood proudly independent, bold enough to challenge giants, daring enough to invent a new category with Diet Right, slowly became something else. An asset, a brand name in a portfolio, a legacy folded into larger corporate structures, eventually landing under the umbrella of Coke Dr. Pepper. Production didn't stop overnight. Bottles still reached shelves. The logo didn't vanish. But the spirit of the company, the scrappy challenger with its own direction and daring, faded into the background of bigger strategies and broader product lines. Headquarters that once buzzed with ambition grew quieter. Departments shrank, roles shifted, decisions about the brand's future were made farther away, by people managing dozens of names instead of one mission. Factories that had once symbolized growth and pride faced hard realities. Some scaled back, others closed. Parking lots that once filled before sunrise slowly emptied. The hum of machinery that had sounded like progress fell silent in places where RC had once been a local landmark. Communities felt the absence. For years, those buildings had meant jobs, stability, identity. Now they stood as reminders of something that had mattered deeply, and was now gone, or transformed beyond recognition. The fall wasn't loud. It was gradual erasure. Shelf space grew smaller. Advertising grew rarer. Younger consumers passed by the familiar red and blue label without the connection older generations still felt. RC was still there, but no longer leading, no longer shaping the future of the industry it once helped redefine. It had gone from pioneer, to participant, to afterthought, and the contrast was striking. There had been a time when trucks rolled out in waves, when factories ran at full tilt, when the company believed it could outthink and outpace anyone. A time when its innovation forced the entire soda world to change direction. Now the brand existed within systems it didn't control, in markets it no longer influenced, carried forward more by history than by momentum. The crown in its name remained, but it was no longer worn. The empire hadn't been destroyed in a single dramatic moment. It had been absorbed, softened, and slowly stripped of the independence that once made it powerful. In the end, RC didn't disappear. It just stopped being the story. From roaring factories and bold first moves, to quiet offices and fading presence, the journey from challenger to champion to memory was complete. And like many fallen empires, what remained wasn't dominance. It was legacy, bottled, labeled, and placed gently on a lower shelf. Legacy and lesson. In the end, the story of Royal Crown Cola isn't only about soda. It's about how success changes people and companies. RC proved that vision can come from anywhere. That a smaller player, with sharper instincts, can see the future before the giants do. It showed how bold thinking, like launching Diet Right when no one else believed in diet soda, can reshape an entire industry. But it also showed something quieter, something easier to miss. Trust is built slowly, bottle by bottle, handshake by handshake, decision by decision, and once it cracks, even slightly, rebuilding takes longer than anyone expects. Along the way, small compromises began to stack up. A cautious decision here, a delayed fix there, a shift toward protecting profits instead of protecting identity. Each choice felt reasonable on its own. Together, they changed the company. Dominance, even partial dominance, brought comfort. Comfort softened urgency. Urgency had once fueled innovation, close relationships, and fast reactions. Without it, warning signs felt less urgent. Risks felt less necessary. And the edge that built the rise slowly dulled. Success didn't fail all at once. It hid the failure while it was still forming. Strong quarters masked weakening connections. Stable revenue disguised fading cultural relevance. Familiar routines covered up the fact that the world outside was moving faster than the company inside. By the time the gap was visible, it was wide. That's the quiet danger at the heart of this story. Not dramatic mistakes, gradual drift. A company doesn't wake up one day and choose decline. It simply keeps choosing what feels safe, efficient, and reasonable, until those choices no longer protect what mattered most. Today, RC Cola still exists. Bottles still sit on store shelves. Vending machines still hum. Somewhere, a factory line still runs, filling cans with a recipe born generations ago, but the roar is softer now, the reach smaller, the crown lighter than it once looked. And in old towns where plants once buzzed with life, empty buildings stand as quiet monuments to ambition, innovation, and the slow cost of forgetting what made success possible in the first place. The lesson isn't that giants fall, it's that they rarely notice the fall beginning. Not when the numbers still look fine, not when the brand still feels familiar, not when the machines are still running. By the time the silence arrives, it has been on its way for years.